Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We're getting ready to start the very first panel of the day. But for anyone who has just logged in, welcome to the event. We're so excited to have you tuning in. I'm Megan Lavin from the Catalyst team. I'm joined by Paul Shapiro and Aleda Solis. We're going to be your guides and MCs throughout today's journey, and we'll be providing some important information and perspective along the way. But please also do see the event FAQs tab at the top of our event site that has all of the important housekeeping details and what to do in case you run into an issue with the platform. So please know that is there as a resource for you. I also want to call out that we're starting each session today by checking in with one of our amazing event partners. We're going to hear sort of what they've been up to since we last saw them in Boston. We're going to hear, what's new at their companies and organizations, and sort of, what the latest and greatest is. So before we dive into the panel, we are going to check in with our friends from Audisto.
Hi everyone. Wow, quite a lot has happened since last TechSEO Boost. Lots of home office, for example, and worse. I wanted to use this opportunity to give you a quick update about what's happening at Audisto. And happier news, we're celebrating the 10-year anniversary of our Audisto crawler this year. That's a lot of data that went through our systems. Many of our users have seized the time during COVID to work on complex relaunch projects they would have otherwise postponed further and further. So during the last year, we were quite busy to enable users doing sophisticated relaunches at scale, be it with the crawler or our automated testing solution, which we already operate since 3 years as well now. If you liked our pagination research, you will be happy to know new studies are coming. Follow our social accounts to get involved. In the meantime, we published a relaunch monitoring guide that might help you out. Have a look, and until next time.
Thank you, Audisto. So excited to have you guys involved in another year of Tech Boost. And with that, we're gonna dive into the Python panel, Python for the win. Now, this is our second session of the day, but it was actually the very first session we planned as we were curating the event and programming the content, just because we thought it was such an important topic. And I'm just curious, Aleda and Paul, why do you guys think this is such an important topic, and what are you most excited about in terms of this panel?
I love how this panel that actually includes Paul. So I'm very looking forward to hear Paul speak about this topic, because I know that he's so knowledgeable about it. But I love how one of the goals here will be to hear firsthand the practical approaches of how to use Python in a very practical way, in a way that actually saves time and makes sense to pretty much like have a positive ROI within our SEO processes, right? We know that in SEO we use so many different platforms, and Python is used as a connector among platforms to automate many tasks that can take a lot to do manually, or even with other platforms or with other approaches. So I'm so very looking forward to hear how all of these different very experienced SEOs are leveraging the power of Python.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally biased, but Python is a huge part of how I work within SEO, and has been for many, many years. So I mean, to me, it's an invaluable piece of knowledge in what I do. And all of these panelists are incredible people that I've been talking with about Python and SEO over the course of the several years now. They're all incredibly knowledgeable themselves, and I think it's going to be incredible. I also want to say that the panel is dedicated to the late, great Hamlet Batista. Many of us, including myself, were very much affected by his loss, and we had originally thought Hamlet would be joining us for the panel, and unfortunately he can't. Please consider donating to the GoFundMe that Lily Ray has set up. The proceeds go to his family. I also want to give a quick anecdote about Hamlet and Python and TechSEO Boost. When Hamlet first spoke at TechSEO Boost, it was me going back and forth with him online, trying to convince him to speak about Python. He had never spoken about Python before, and he was very worried that it was too in the weeds and no one would be interested in hearing about Python and SEO. And eventually I convinced him to do it. And I think he was very, very much brought alive by the reception of that presentation, and it was very much a catalyst for Hamlet and Python and SEO and everything that was to come. So I'm very much happy that we can take a moment to dedicate this panel to him.
That is wonderful, Paul. I am actually like very impressed to hear this, because I cannot imagine right now to talk about Python and SEO without thinking about Hamlet, right? He was literally the leader in this topic, and a lot of people. He inspires so many people. A lot of people started even programming, developing from scratch, right? By learning Python because of him. So yes, as it has been such a great loss for the community as a whole, and it's lovely to see how you have recall him and how this panel is dedicated to him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for the kind words, guys. Paul, I know you're a moderator for this Python panel, so we'll let you go to your moderator duties, and let's make Hamlet proud.
All right, let's dive right in. Import Python panel. Corny joke. Okay. Since we are in a gallery view, I'll start in sort of the order in which everyone appears on my screen. Can you tell me a bit about yourself and your experience with Python, starting with Charlie?
Hi, guys. Very great to be here. Really, really happy. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone. So my name is Charlie. I'm an SEO and a BI consultant. I've been doing SEO in the UK mainly, but also in France. I've been working in TechSEO mainly, enterprise accounts, large migration, and I've been doing Python for started Python 4 years ago with script. I've been coding for about a year now, a bit more than a year. And at the moment I'm freelancing and I've got the chance to do SEO and Python at the same time. So that's pretty much my dream job. I've started actually with one of your scripts. It was about 4 years ago. And I was in a large company, large retailer in the UK, which needed some kind of backup of Search Console data and visualization of Search Console data. Obviously, back in the days, you couldn't really do that, not even today, and needed a programming language to help me do that. And Python, I think I found a script on your website, and this is how I started. It really, really helped back in the days, and I think I owe you a few beers for that. So that was my very first contact with Python.
Yes, thank you, Charlie, and I'm happy to have contributed to that. I think the world is better for having you writing SEO and Python together, so I appreciate that. Moving on to Derek, tell me a little bit about yourself and your experience with Python, how you got started.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Derek. I'm an SEO manager at Reprise Digital, working specifically with Johnson & Johnson across their entire portfolio. I've been working with Python for about 3 years now, and I started kind of on accident. My last role, my first agency role, the SEO team actually sat with the performance analytics team. So I was surrounded by data analysts and data scientists all day who were using Python, R, other kind of statistical modeling tools. And I said, wow, this is really useful. Like, I can do my job a lot faster with these types of techniques. And so I started learning from them. And then eventually I was trying to find the real overlap between what I was doing in my role and the larger SEO community. And that's probably how I ran into Paul too, trying to find the people who were doing this very early on. And so I kind of have to give some of my credit to you as well.
I'm blushing. Anyway, I didn't realize I contributed so much. Okay, Andrew, it's on to you. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your experience with Python.
Great, thanks. Real excited to be here in chat today as well. So I started around 8 years ago, actually completely outside of SEO before I got sucked into this world, which I'm very pleased that I did. My friend and I were actually building an application, and we needed something that that could crawl a website. And so went down the rabbit hole and found Python, and it's been headfirst, always forward from there. So so in my current role, I lead performance analytics for Group M, mainly for SEO and SEM, and working to automate pretty much everything and anything we can.
Lovely. And moving on, thank you, Andrew. Moving on to Jess. Tell us about yourself and your experience with Python.
Yeah, I started using Python to make games for myself, and then I kind of saw yours, Paul, and Hamlet's Python scripts for SEO, and I was like, oh yeah, you can use Python to like automate work stuff. And I started automating some of the stuff for Proficient, and it kind of ramped up from there. And I currently do SEO freelance and analytics specifically for CBS full time. So
wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Which brings us right into our next question. I'd love to know a little bit about how you are currently using Python to advance your SEO work. Starting with, again, Charlie.
Right. I had to, I mean, there's a few things, but let's try to make it concise. Machine learning mainly for me, classification tasks, fuzzy matching, mapping purposes, because I've, again, working mainly with migrations, large migrations, that's super useful. SEO forecasting, use mainly Prophet, Facebook Prophet for it, very versatile, and certainly more accurate than simple linear regressions for forecasting SEO. I think mainly using Python as a missing link in a given ecosystem. For example, I work a lot with GCP. And so GCP is great because you got everything, you got BigQuery, you got Data Studio, but at the same time, you need this kind of extra capability to wrangle the data. And because Python is this glue language which can connect with pretty much anything, which can transform pretty much any data, I'm using Python for that. So with GCP, I've got cloud functions running with Python connected to BigQuery via cloud schedulers and Data Studio. So that's really, really as part of a bigger ecosystem, I'm using Python today in my work. And to make it brief, I'm also using Streamlit. I've been using that for a year now, and I've been it's pretty much like the Streamlit guy in the SEO community now, and it's great because people are enjoying that. People are enjoying having the ability to build a web application with very little CSS, HTML knowledge, JavaScript knowledge, and this is what Streamlit is giving you. And yeah, so that's also what I'm using pretty much daily now.
I have you to thank for getting me started with Streamlit. So I would be remiss if you didn't have an opportunity to tell people a little bit about what Streamlit is.
Sure. But that's really glad to hear that, Paul. That's good. Feeling humble. So Streamlit is basically a web framework, but without the complexity of it. So when I say web framework, I could compare with Flask or Django in the Python world, but you could basically, with a bit of Python code, design your own web application and deploy it free and with anyone. So you don't necessarily have to learn anything. You don't have to learn JavaScript, CSS, HTML in order to have this front end. Everything front end related and obviously back end is Python powered, which means that any widget, for example, that you're designing is a Python variable. And that basically removes a lot of the complexity you would have and a lot of the learning curve you would have if you were to design a Flask application or a Django application. So it's really, really easy to use. It's open source, it's free. And I've done a Brighton talk a few weeks ago about it. So I can share the links later on about my presentation, but I really invite anyone to give it a try and obviously pester me on Twitter if you've got any questions on it.
I've fully adopted it. It's fantastic. I've converted so many Jupyter notebooks into like
yes,
instant web applications, and as you can imagine, that's very, very useful within an organization. Anyway, moving on to Derek. How do you use Python to advance your SEO work today?
I would say a little bit of everything. So I would say as of right now, a lot of my Python work is really data wrangling via API. So taking things from Google Search Console, Google Analytics, Search Metrics, SEMrush, Ahrefs, any other platform that has an API, I'm actively using it to kind of wrangle data and do data aggregation. A lot of NLP work for audience development, audience persona building, trying to really understand voice of customer using data both from the SEO side and from the social side, taking Reddit data, Instagram data, customer surveys, anything that we can really build a true, persona of an audience who would be reading something from a search engine. And then just really for ad hoc tasks. So the task that takes a half hour that you want done in 30 seconds, it's building up all of those incremental hours together that of manual work and trying to automate that and make things as streamlined as possible. And finally, it's really scaling organizations with Python. So having large teams, especially working across a portfolio client like J&J, where you have a lot of moving parts, trying to drive efficiency with very small tasks across a very wide range of things that need to be done.
Sounds a lot like how I use Python, and probably many of us on the panel. So thank you, Derek. Andrew, would you like to answer the question of how do you use Python to advance work in SEO?
Definitely. I think Derek's really nailed it right on the head. I use it pretty similarly, right? It's a very easy way to get data from APIs. If you think of other languages, you get, not that I'm biased or anything, but, if you have to write 20 lines of code to make, a network request, Python, 1 line of code, boom, you got your response. So it's quick, it's easy, really in there to grab all the data that we possibly can. The more data we have, the more powerful we can be. And if we can do that quickly, it's even better. So really taking all of that data and then trying to create some sort of automation, making everyone's lives easier. If we can get everyone out of Excel, everyone out of the platforms trying to download Excels, looking at stuff and just give them a raw output, we can do a lot more cool stuff in SEO and focus on that. So that's really sort of our mission and how we're using Python.
Totally. Jess, moving on to you. How is it that you're using Python in SEO?
I think my biggest thing day to day is using it for data verification and checking for problems. And then I've been doing some NLP stuff as well, like Derek, I think, and using a lot of the Google APIs because I think those are really interesting to play around with and compare kind of where a page exists in search as it is and what Google's APIs see when they look at that page. And for data verification, obviously you have to have human eyes on it, but it really kind of takes away from the monotony of having to check through columns and columns of Excel manually when you can just be like, well, if it's HTTP and then 3 dashes, that's wrong, take away a dash. That slashes speeds up everyone's workday.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially for those you're working with a large website and you're doing a lot of, technical SEO, you need to pay attention to those sort of things. It's hard to look at that at scale, and, Python's definitely a useful tool in that arsenal. So thank you, Jess. So that's everyone. We know a little bit more about how everyone's using Python to advance their SEO work. And we can move on to our next question. What are some of your favorite and most used Python libraries? We all have our favorite libraries. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of overlap, but starting with Charlie, we already know a little bit about Streamlit, so I'm gonna check that box already. Anything else, Charlie?
I don't know. I mean, there's so many libraries. I wanted I wanted to give maybe two simple ones, very powerful, but yet simple. I like simple. I like when people can actually understand and get cracking quickly without having to kind of go into a course or anything. So I'm going to say, first one, I'm going to say polyfuzz. I can see Derek nodding, so I'm sure he's used that. It's fairly recent, but it's great because it's a high-level API built on top of TensorFlow, so you don't have the TensorFlow complexity. However, you can leverage, you can take the advantage of the TensorFlow capabilities. I've used this library many times in my apps, more on the client side. I've shared one 2 weeks ago with Brighton, the Brighton SEO app, which I've given with a talk. It uses polyfuzz, and what it does is it does fuzzy matching, which is a normal fuzzy matching you'd have with other libraries, but it also do auto mapping thanks to machine learning models. And there is so many models you could use. You get fast text, Glove. You can use transformers now from Hugging Face, so you can connect to many other models. You can also use BERT. And again, it's from an SEO standpoint, it's great because it's easy to use. You can plug it in a collab or in a Streamlit app, and it's easy to do keyword mapping, URL mapping, comparisons. So from an SEO standpoint, it's really, really tremendously useful. That's one. I'm going to give you another one. Ludwig. So Ludwig is basically, again, it's my main motto here is to give something simple for users and for the audience to try. Again, it's a high-level API built on top of TensorFlow again, but it's super easy to use. It's open source, obviously. There's a Python API and it works with Bash, so you don't necessarily have to use Python for it. And it's super versatile. It's like a Swiss Army knife of machine learning. It's a deep learning library, so it's a specific kind of machine learning. But you can really do anything. You can do text classification, intent detection, sentiment analysis, entity recognition, translation forecasting, really you name it. And it's not even just text. If you wanted to use, like for example, voice, speech recognitions or music translation, take some WAV file and get the text out of it, you can actually play with the encoders. And it's really, really flexible. It's good for beginners, but it's also good for more advanced Pythonistas or Python people, because it really teaches you the more advanced concepts of machine learning. You can play with the hyperparameters, for example. You can play with RSE curves. So you can really be easy and straightforward or a bit more complex. And so, yeah, I think I'd recommend this one as well.
Yeah, those are great ones. I know you were trying to get me to try Ludwig. I haven't dived into that yet, but I'm using polyfuzz for sure.
Using polyfuzz.
Yeah,
you like it?
I do like it. I built a Streamlit app that detects duplicate content, plugging directly into our CMS database. So using polyfuzz, it's very easy to use and the results are very high quality, and I really like it. Okay, Derek, on to you.
I feel like I always end up gravitating towards the same handful, even though I use a lot of different libraries on a day-to-day basis. And I bet there'll be a lot of overlap here with requests, pandas, beautiful soup. Pretty much auto import those no matter what script I'm writing. It could be NLP analysis where I'm going to need data down the line. If I need something, pretty much any data set, you're going to need tabular. So you're going to use something like pandas, which will just, it's the Excel of Python. Requests to make simple HTTP requests. Simple meaning, a very powerful thing in a very few lines of code. And then beautiful soup for HTML parsing. I think when you bring all of these things together, which are relatively straightforward, combined with, a really creative approach to using them together, you can do some really amazing things. I'm building out an API package or library right now that is scraping a site's documentation, putting that into pandas, and then doing some string manipulation to write back the functions I need for an API wrapper, for example. Something that you would think oh, I need to use machine learning to auto generate code. No, you can really use some very simple libraries that are very easy to start, whether you're, first day into Python or years in, and do some really amazing things with them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you bring up a good point regarding machine learning. I mean, everyone's using it. A lot of people are using it right now. It's very hot, but sometimes just going back to the basics using heuristics can accomplish quite a bit. Thank you. Moving on to Andrew. What are the libraries that you like to use when you're writing a Python script?
I'm going to echo Derek. Definitely have that copy paste, right? Request, pandas, beautiful soup. You'll pretty much always have those, especially if you're doing anything with network requests or HTML parsing, which is 90% of our job anyway. Whether it's just using our eyes on a website or using Python. So those are immensely helpful and used in almost everything that I do. There's a couple more. I really like to use Selenium as well. So being able to take control of Chrome or Firefox or any other browser, and network requests are great if you need to make API calls, but for example, maybe you need to render a page. You don't have to worry about it. Just puppet Google Chrome and then have it do it for you. That's a huge one. NLTK for natural language processing. And then one that was kind of mentioned here that it's a little older and not used as much. I kind of started with it a while ago, but I like Django as well. So that's another one that tends to come up.
So tell people what Django is for those of us who may be unfamiliar.
Right. So Django, if you're building a web app, Django is a framework that kind of helps you through that. It holds your hand a little bit, but it's not quite as robust as some of the newer frameworks. So you kind of have to know what you're doing with HTML and CSS and sometimes a little bit of the back end. But for example, it auto builds all the foundation of an app. So you have if you need something that has a login with an admin page and user privileges, that's all built into the app. So you don't have to worry about that. You can get right in. It integrates really well with databases, and so it makes it very easy to use Python at the center of everything for whatever you're building.
I know we had chatted about this a bit in the past, where I've never really had the need to touch Django because most of my Python applications are very small, one-off, one-page API type things, where I end up using Flask as a library, which is a little bit simpler for serving web pages. But certainly Django is a go-to for larger web applications.
Definitely, and that's a great point. Flask is great for the smaller applications. Django is really when you start to think about larger apps or apps that have many facets, not just maybe one simple script or one simple use case. When you start to really scale it, it's a good place to kind of check that out. But Flask will do 99% of what you do or what you need most of the time. So,
thank you, Andrew. On that note, we can move on to Jess. Tell us about your most used Python libraries.
Well, I'm going last, but I think so. Everyone else's answers have kind of covered my basic. This is what I start off with in a file with beautiful soup, pandas, requests, Selenium. So the ones I use that I don't think have been mentioned yet. I really like NumPy, which is a library for working with arrays and linear algebra. And if you're doing math, NumPy is the place to kind of go with that. I've also been using GPT-2 Simple, which is a simple port of the GPT-2 library, which is really fun. You can use it for text generation, which is what I've been kind of doing. It's very fun to kind of scrape some Twitter profiles, plug all the data into GPT-2, and then be like, let's generate some Twitter comments from these two people and see what happens. And then the other one that I've been using a lot recently is Puppeteer, which is Puppeteer, but for Python. It's not an official port, but if you just want to use the same things as JavaScript's Puppeteer, which is a library for like controlling browser actions and that kind of thing, Puppeteer is also there and easy. So yeah, those are my current experiments.
Well, that's great, Jess. Why would someone use Puppeteer over Selenium, which Andrew mentioned?
A few reasons, like some of the Puppeteer functions include things like being able to screenshot pages more really easily and automate the browser actions just kind of built in. It's really useful for a lot of like SEO kind of tasks because it's supposed to be really close to the Google bot crawler. So what you're seeing is close to Googlebot.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point because Selenium out of the box is just like, hi, I'm a browser. And if you open it, it's just this tiny square on your screen, and you have to tell it exactly how you want it to be. You have to tell it the user agent, you have to tell it how big the screen, etc. You have to tell it literally everything. So I think that's a great point that, you know, it really helps for it focus on the SEO portion of.
Thank you. Moving on, I think we're all a little bit more educated on Python libraries. And I just want to take a step back. I want to learn about everyone's genesis with Python, and how did you learn it, right? We have a little bit of the answer as to why and how, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you ended up learning it, starting with Charlie. Sorry, Charlie.
I've started about the learning, the theoretical learning about 2 years ago on a website called DataCamp. You may be familiar with this one. It's really good. It's affordable. It's very hands-on. You've got kernels, so you can actually type your codes and see whether you're right or wrong. There's a lot of content. There's many libraries. There's many frameworks. It's really, really good on that. Now, the con, the pro is also a con because there's so much stuff. Courses are being added as they go along because anyone can actually upload and teach a course. So as a result, I think it's really easy to get overwhelmed and to lose track of where you'd like to go. So if you want a really clear, narrow path, I wouldn't necessarily recommend DataCamp. But if you got a very clear idea of what you want to learn, let's say you want to learn PyTorch or TensorFlow and Pandas, then in that case, you know which courses to pick, and then it makes it easier. Otherwise, if you've got no idea, probably going to go towards something like DataQuest. If you want to have a course with a kernel, with a point-based system, DataQuest is probably a better idea. But I did both, and they're both really good in their own way. Now, if I had to start again, if I had to kind of, start from scratch and learn again, I wouldn't do that. I would actually, I would minimize the time learning the theory, because I did learn the theory for quite a few weeks / months. And end of the day, I think it's not the way I'd do. I would certainly learn the Python basics online. There's many free websites you can use. There is Kaggle, gives you a free Python / machine learning / deep learning course. It's really well explained, and it's also dynamic with the kernel. So you can get the basics of Python, the list, the dictionaries, all the underlying principles right. And after a few weeks, I would straight on think about, something that may have been bothering you in your work, something that you're wasting your time on, or your team, if you're working with a team that you're wasting your time on. And I would literally crack on. I will try to kind of, try to fix the issues that is bothering you, or try to save time. So, applying simple machine learning concepts, simple classification tasks, or play, as Derek was saying, anyone in the panel is saying, play with the relevant APIs. So if you're using Swimming Frog or a tool and it's not quite nicely tailored to what your client has, just pull out the API and see whether you can blend the data. There's so many good resources online for that.
Thank you, Charlie. That was quite in depth. I have been recommending the Kaggle course to many people, even though that's not how I learned. I do think it going through it briefly, it looks very good, especially for today's landscape. Derek, do you want to tackle this question about how you learned Python and why?
I had a very kind of opposite of Charlie in that I was hands-on almost right away and did not learn the theory at all. And if I were to go back and do it all again, I would learn the theory and like the basic functions first. I was handed just a ton of scripts of just like functions that I was supposed to learn pretty much right away. It's like, oh, we do this type of data manipulation on a regular basis. And I had to basically take scripts and reverse engineer them and understand why each piece worked. So it would be hours on end looking at variables and going, okay, is this somebody else's variable or is this part of a library? And then having to connect the pieces back together. So I think through reverse engineering scripts that were already written out, and this can be something that you can do even outside of a professional setting. You can go on Kaggle or go on GitHub and look at scripts and try to understand the why for everything and learn that way, and then pick up the theory as you're reverse engineering other builds. I find myself doing this even now to continue learning, is just taking what other people have written and then try to understand the big why of, you know, the justification for using this type of script or this type of syntax in such a manner. But beyond that, I also did data camp. I still do some data camp now. A lot of YouTube and a lot of just collaborating with there's a lot of head nods here, and a lot of collaborating with just the broader community. I think there's so many active participants and the community is growing so much so now that it's so easy to learn things from others who are doing what we're doing. Oftentimes when I'm posting things on Twitter about the scripts that I've written out, it's a combination of here, reverse engineer what I just wrote, and also like, I want to hear how somebody can do what I just did better. So really just that learning through doing and learning through collaborating with the community is probably the best way that I've found to learn. Though in hindsight, I would do things a little bit differently if I was just starting, you know, taking the time with the theoretical, understanding some basic Python functions, you know, built-in functions, things that you can do without having to rely on a library before diving deep into, you know, the nitty and gritty of it all.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Derek. I do just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge why Python in general. So I think there's programming is a very useful skill if you work in SEO. It definitely enables a lot of things. That can enable better collaboration with developers. It can, you know, unlock a world of data and understanding. And I don't think your programming, if you're just getting started, I don't think that programming language has to be Python. It could be other programming languages. In general, Python and the Python community is very in-depth in terms of data, working with data. It's a very good option for working with data because there's tons of libraries out there, and tons of like open source utilities and platforms and code for working with data. So it's a very good option for working with data. But if you were a little bit more interested in working in web development, and certainly front-end web development, then maybe JavaScript would be a better or different option. Anyway, moving on. Andrew, if you could answer how you went about learning Python, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I was a bit more, I guess, traditional, if you will. I was working in IT a number of years ago, and it was one of those things where you have a set of problems that you always hear like, oh, this can make something better, that can make something better. Have you tried this? And for us, it was, hey, well, you know, this language Python can really help do a lot of things. You know, it can help you like speed up, you know, communication between a bunch of stuff. And so I went about, I actually took a couple courses, so in person, obviously, and then online. So I started with the theoretical portion, and then something I'd highly recommend if you do like the theoretical portion as well is edX is a wonderful resource. It's free, or you can pay for a certificate. There's a couple of courses out there that are absolutely wonderful that teach you the theory of computer science as well as basic Python, and then it goes deeper into data. It does not hold your hand as much as some of the other courses, so it's kind of it throws you back into that college experience. So you really gotta get in there, but highly recommend those. So I kind of started there, and then from that, there's a couple other ones. So something that comes up all the time, like Udemy is really great, especially for AWS and GCP related Python stuff. You know, there's tons and tons and tons of documentation for AWS and GCP, but sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially if you just want to do one task with Python. So they really focus in on the one thing that you need to do so that you can get everything set up and running. So that's been pretty good. I'd like to echo the entire sentiment around the open source community. I think that is the beauty of Python, and something that really pushes it to the forefront, at least in the SEO community. If you think about other languages, everyone's kind of a code hoarder. They kind of do this, and no one wants to share their proprietary code. We're all about sharing, and I think that's what makes it great. It's like, you've got someone way off in the distance in who knows where that's like, hey, I know that it's a pain to deal with Omniture, Adobe API, so I built a wrapper so that none of you have to go through the pain that I went through, and then the rest of us can just make a one-line call, or someone that's, Google's notorious for not following PEP 8. And so you have to reformat the entire example they give you. So people having GitHub open so that you can copy paste the code and not have to reformat everything is wonderful. And I think it also gives you that great learning, because you can dive in. It's not like, well, okay, I just did machine learning, but I have no idea what happened. I just clicked a function and it went. You can go inside and look at the code and understand it. So I think that's extremely beneficial, especially for those that are really curious.
I didn't realize this was a shared experience with Google not following PEP 8, but that is incredibly frustrating. And those for you in the audience who don't know what PEP 8 is, PEP 8 is sort of a standardized way of formatting Python code to make it a little bit more Pythonic and readable. So it's not enforced, but it's a nice standard to follow. Moving on to Jess, how did you learn about Python?
I did spend some time just in the kind of Udemy, MIT open source software, Code Academy, Free Code Camp, like tutorial zone. Before I actually made anything, I did a lot of I don't know how to do this yet, and I don't want to mess everything up, so I'm just going to follow the tutorials, and eventually it'll click for me, and then I'll go and do actual coding. But I can't do that until I am perfect and understand everything and know what every function in Python means automatically. And I think that really meant that I didn't learn anything. It wasn't until I was like, no, I have to just try and make this game, or I have to try and figure out Pygame, or I have to try and take these steps to grab this API, or that kind of thing. It wasn't until I had to force myself to do something practical that there weren't easy tutorials for, that I was like, oh, that's how it works. 3 years of looking at Code Academy courses didn't help as much as one weekend yelling at my Python script trying to get it to work. I would recommend doing Code Academy because it's pretty hand-holdy, and the other courses, but I also think just jump in and try and do something, and that's like the best place to kind of start.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Yeah, there's actually a lot of debate. So Python wasn't my first programming language, and I've moved around a bit over the years for sure. So I had researched programming pedagogy at one point, and it's really highly debated whether you should learn theory first or like jump into the unknown and start writing code right away. And I think some people work a little bit better with the former, and some people work a little bit better with the latter. So it really depends on you. When I was learning Python initially, there weren't all these resources. So I pieced it together from a lot of like tutorials and documentation. And I'm so happy that there's all these resources now where you can more easily learn. Not something I personally use, but I recommend it all the time, and I've used it for other purposes, is lynda.com, which became LinkedIn Learning. If you are part of a large public library system like New York City or Boston, you usually get access to it for free. And it's got 1 million tutorials on coding and everything you would ever want, and I highly recommend it. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining the panel. This was really, really great. Thank you, Charlie, Derek, Andrew, and Jess. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I just want to again thank all the panelists, Derek, Jess, Charlie, and Andrew. I had a great time with that, and I'm sure the audience did too. So thank you, everyone.
That was an awesome panel indeed. And that being said, we're going on a short break now. We'll see you back soon.